In this video, we're going to show you how we built our Flagstone Patio, but as a disclaimer up front, it's not perfect and we made a lot of mistakes. But we wanted to share with you what we learned along the way and point out things we wished we did differently so that you know what to look out for if you're attempting this yourself. So stick around to see how we did it. We started by staking out the area where we wanted the patio to go. We wanted it close to the waterfall so that we could create a conversation area that takes advantage of the ambiance created by our new water feature. I started by drawing an outline that will be the overall shape of the patio, roughly rectangular but with soft curved corners and some irregularity to keep it looking organic and less rigid. We're going to be building our patio with a 3-inch layer of gravel at the base, followed by a 1-inch layer of decomposed granite, or DG, that will act as a leveling layer for the flagstones to sit on. We're going to be leaving the stones slightly taller than the surrounding land, about an inch or so, to accommodate for the 1 to 2-inch layer of mulch we'll be adding around it when we're done with the yard. This way the finished patio will be flush with the surroundings. It is recommended you grade your patio to shed water off of it. I read 1/8 of an inch drop per foot is recommended. We went for a more subtle grade with ours, which should be okay because of the permeability of the materials we chose, but more on that later. Once I had the shape traced out, I dug out the perimeter and used our Ryobi tiller attachment to loosen up the soil in the middle of the patio area to make digging out the rest easier. Because we're going to be leaving our flagstones slightly proud, I only needed to dig out about 4.5 to 5 inches or so. With the area dug out, I laid down some weed barrier. Luckily, we had a scrap piece of material left over from our waterfall build that fit the area perfectly. If anyone is interested in knowing how much this all cost us, let us know in the comments. We really like to keep our videos as concise as possible, so we're not including that information here, but if there is any interest, we may consider making a separate video where we break down our expenses. I know when we set out to build this, it was hard to get an accurate gauge of how much we could expect to spend, so I could see it being helpful to others in our position. With the barrier in place, it was time to start throwing down some gravel. This is the same sort of 3/4 inch crushed gravel we used as the base of our shed foundation we built last year. You can head over to our channel to check that video out if you want a more in-depth look at building a gravel base. It was after the first few cartloads of gravel that I realized I missed a step. I forgot to install the edge trim border before throwing down gravel. Honestly, it should have been installed right after I dug out the area before I even laid down the weed barrier, but luckily we weren't too far along yet, so it was easy enough to pull back the gravel at the edges and lay in the edge trim. I found this edge trim on Amazon and I'll leave a link in the description below. It was really cheap and easy to work with. It's a flexible composite material that you drive in with stakes. This will help keep the gravel and DG in place and provide a nice bit of edge support for the flagstones. Once I had it installed, I went ahead and backfilled and compacted to keep it from shifting around, and then we could continue filling the pit with gravel. With the 3-inch layer of gravel compacted, we were ready to add our 1-inch leveling layer of decomposed granite. In order to ensure we had a nice and flat top to work with, we placed these 1-inch PVC conduits we had lying around on top of the gravel. This will provide a support system that we'll be able to screed over later. Here you can see we used a 2x4 to screed the DG level, gliding the 2x4 across the 2 PVC pipes we laid down earlier. This allowed us to easily fill in the low spots and scrape off the high areas. Once it was level, we removed the pipes and filled in the voids with more DG. I used a drywall trowel to spread the added DG flat on the surface. Then we compacted this leveling layer with a plate compactor to make sure it was nice and tight, flat, and stable. One of the main advantages of using DG for this top layer instead of, say, paver sand is that it compacts really tightly and forms a hard, stable surface to support the stones. With sand, the surface remains a little loose, which could cause stones to drift over time. With our base layers in place, we were ready to start laying down the flagstones. This is a point in the process where I should warn you against doing what we did. You can see here that the flagstones we went with are only about 1 inch thick. While it is still possible to build a patio with these, I do have to recommend going with a thicker stone. In order to ensure a more solid, long-lasting setup, it's best to go with stones that are 1.5 to 2 inches thick. This will increase the cost. Most stone yards will charge you based on the weight of the stone, so the heavier the stone, the more it will cost you. Also, the thicker flagstones will be harder to lift and move around, and setting the patio takes a lot of moving it around, so you'll most likely need help. Because our patio is not going to be seeing a lot of heavy traffic and will most likely be covered with furniture, I think we'll be okay. Everything seems to be holding up well so far, but some of the smaller stones do still have some movement. Just trying to be honest and open, but if we could go back and do it again, we'd definitely go with thicker stones. Another word of advice, try and go with the largest stones you can manage to lift. In general, the beefier the stone is, the more stable it's going to be, and the more likely it'll stay in place when you set it. If you like doing jigsaw puzzles, you're going to love this part of the process. It's really just a matter of trying different pieces in any given spot and seeing what fits. You're not looking for perfection, after all, we do want a more rustic, organic look, but you also want to try and keep the stones close together. This is another lesson we learned along the way. You can see even here that I'm probably leaving gaps that are a little too big. The closer you place them together, the better they'll stay in place, and you'll be able to manage weeds and the material in the joints better if the gaps are smaller. This, of course, will take more time and effort, but it will pay off in the long run. Right now, I'm just focused on placing the stones. I won't be setting any of them until I have the whole puzzle figured out. With some of the edges, we had to cut the stones, but luckily cutting is pretty easy. We were able to mark it out and cut about halfway through the stone with the angle grinder and a diamond blade. Then we just used a hammer to whack off the cutoff. It honestly didn't take that long to get everything in place, and it was probably the most fun part of the process, where we really got to see our vision come together rather quickly. But the stones are not man-made, and being a natural material, they are not flat or even the same thicknesses throughout, so the next step involves leveling each stone individually to ensure that you end up with a surface that is as flat as possible. Here's where it got not so fun. In my opinion, it was the most tedious part of the process that ended up taking us many hours. You want to get each stone level and also level with its surrounding stones, which involves adding and compacting DG little by little till you get to a place where it's sitting as flat as possible. Once you're happy with how a stone is sitting, you'll want to tap it in place with a mallet to help seat it in the DG tightly. But be careful not to use too much force. We definitely damaged a few stones by whacking too hard. With the stones finally set in place, we decided to sneak in a low voltage lighting wire in the gaps before we filled them in. This is going to be used to add some under the sofa lighting once we get our furniture in place, but you'll have to make sure to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications so you don't miss our upcoming video where we reveal the fruits of our labor as we button up this first phase of our backyard overhaul. We filled our joints with more DG, but this time we used decomposed granite that has a stabilizer mixed in. The stabilizer is activated by water, and once it dries, it hardens the DG even further, which will do a better job of keeping it in place. The DG with stabilizer is a little more expensive than the natural kind, but since we're only using it in the joints, we didn't need much. Also worth noting, even with the stabilizer, this DG is still water permeable, which is great for us because we only went with a very slight grade. So if we had gone with a less permeable material, like say polymeric sand, any rainwater falling on the patio could end up pooling up without having any means of drainage. Applying this part is a lot like grouting tile. We just threw it down and used a large broom to sweep it into the cracks and then cleaned up the excess. Once all our gaps were filled, we added water and let it set. After this first layer sets and hardens, the level of the filler in the joints will sink down a bit, so you will need to follow it up with another layer or two of DG, which just involves repeating the process until your gaps are filled nicely. Unlike tile or even polymeric sands, you don't have to worry about any excess DG that is still sitting on the flagstones after you wet it. While the stabilizer does harden this type of DG, it is still easy enough to break it up with a broom, so you will be able to sweep up the stones and clean up the surface of the flagstones after it dries. After a final light sweeping with the broom, I gave ours a quick and light pass with a leaf blower to knock off any remaining loose chunks, and with that, we were done. It's not perfect, and if we ever do another one, I'm sure it'll be better, but for our purposes, it should be just fine. I do have to say, I liked the look of the stones so much better when they were wet and you could see all of the beautiful deep tones in the rock, but I read too many posts online warning against using any kind of wet look sealers on flagstones to feel comfortable trying it. But I do have to admit I am still tempted. If anyone watching has any experience sealing flagstones, please do let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on the matter. Also, for any of you who've made it this far, we're going to be putting out a video that covers everything we've done to the backyard so far, so stay tuned for that one. You'll get to see everything finally in place and buttoned up. It's only the first phase of the backyard, but it is satisfying to see some of our hard work start to pay off. For now, here's some sexy drone shots of our finished flagstone patio. As always, thanks for watching and thanks for the support.